Hey guys, tonight we wake before the sun has fully decided whether it wants to rise at all, and you're already aware something is wrong. The air inside your narrow chamber feels tight, like the stone itself is holding its breath. Somewhere beyond the thick castle walls, a horn sounds, low, uncertain, then answered by another farther away. You're not sure if it's dawn, or if your fear simply dragged you out of sleep early. The rush-strewn floor pricks your bare feet as you sit up, and you can smell the faint smoke of last night's hearth mingling with damp wool and cold stone. Outside, boots pound across the inner yard, and you hear someone shout to bar the outer gate. This is the morning the rumours become real. You probably won't survive this. Statistically speaking, medieval sieges were less about glorious sword fights, and more about slow hunger, disease and waiting. Comforting, I know. So, before we go any further, if this quiet space makes you feel even a little less alone, you can like the video and subscribe, but only if it feels right to your heart. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Are you lying awake in a quiet room at 2 a.m? Or maybe starting your day in a rainy city, eyes still heavy? Drop your time and place in the comments. Let's remind each other we're not alone out here. Now, dim the lights, let your shoulders relax, and let's begin tonight's slow, strange journey together here on Timeless Sleep. You pull on your rough linen tunic, still stiff from yesterday's sweat, and step into the narrow corridor. The castle is already alive in a way it usually isn't at this hour. Normally, mornings begin with the clatter of wooden buckets at the well and the sleepy mutter of servants coaxing fires back to life. Today, the sounds are sharper. Metal scrapes on stone. Someone drags a crate across the floor. A child begins to cry and is quickly hushed. You follow the current of bodies toward the inner courtyard, where pale light spills over the battlements. The sky beyond the walls is streaked with cold pink, and in that early glow you see them, dark shapes on the distant ridge, like a second forest that wasn't there yesterday. Tents, banners, the faint glitter of spear points. The enemy has arrived in the night and settled themselves with unsettling patience. Sieges were common in this century, far more common than open field battles, because stone walls are stubborn things, and lords prefer to starve each other rather than risk a single afternoon of chaos. You lean against the well's worn edge and try to swallow the dryness in your throat. The lord of the castle stands near the gatehouse, still fastening his belt, his hair uncombed, but already wearing authority like armour. Orders snap from him in quick bursts: close the outer gate, raise the drawbridge, inventory the stores. The portcullis, that iron-toothed grid that always seemed more decorative than practical, now crashes down with a shudder that vibrates through your ribs. The sound is final, like a lid slamming shut. A few villagers from the nearby hamlet had made it inside before dawn, breathless and wild-eyed, clutching sacks of barley and a single terrified goat. They huddle together now, staring at the walls as if expecting them to melt. You catch fragments of their whispers. The enemy numbers in the hundreds, maybe more. They brought wagons. They've cut the road to the river. Someone claims to have seen a siege tower in pieces, ready to be assembled. Someone else swears the attackers carry relics that guarantee victory. In moments like this, superstition spreads faster than fire. You tilt your head up toward the battlements. Archers are already climbing the narrow stone stairs, bows slung across their backs, quivers bumping against leather jerkins. The castle's defences look imposing from within. Thick curtain walls, corner towers. A deep moat that glimmers dull and green, but you know, as everyone here knows, that walls are only as strong as the supplies behind them. You remember hearing that some sieges have lasted months, even years, entire communities sealed inside like forgotten jars. There was once a siege so long that the defenders resorted to eating their horses, then their dogs, and then boiling leather belts for broth. You glance at the stable yard and instinctively avoid making eye contact with the old mare, who's carried you to market more times than you can count. It's too early to be thinking like that. Probably. The castle chapel bell begins to ring, not in celebration, but in steady, grounding rhythm. People drift toward it as if pulled by gravity. Inside, the air smells of beeswax and cold incense. You kneel on the hard stone floor among bakers, grooms, laundresses, and armoured men, all equal now in the dim light. The priest's voice trembles at first, then steadies as he speaks of endurance and divine favour. Historically, faith was as crucial as food during a siege. Morale could crumble long before the walls did. You bow your head and try to picture protection descending like a shield over the battlements. Instead, you see the distant ridge again, the faint movement of men arranging campfires with deliberate calm. They aren't charging, they aren't shouting, they're settling in. That's somehow worse. When you step back outside, the sun has finally broken free of the horizon, casting long gold beams across the courtyard. For a brief, almost ridiculous moment, it looks beautiful. Smoke from the kitchens curls upward, catching the light. A rooster, oblivious or heroic, crows from atop a barrel. You almost laugh. Of course there's still breakfast to make. Even under threat, stomachs expect their due. The cooks are already hauling sacks of grain toward the storerooms beneath the keep. You follow, helping lift a crate of dried peas, feeling the rough wood bite into your palms. Down in the cool dark of the undercroft, stewards are counting everything: barley, oats, salted pork hanging from hooks, wheels of hard cheese sealed in wax. Each item is murmured aloud and marked with a scratch on a wax tablet. Careful calculation begins now. Rationing will decide whether you endure for weeks or wither in days. Ale barrels are rolled into the deepest corner, not for celebration, but because water from the well can turn foul if too many rely on it. In truth, medieval people often drank weak ale daily because it was safer than untreated water, a small comfort that feels oddly reassuring as you watch the barrels stack like silent soldiers. Above, a shout ripples across the yard. You hurry back into the light and see a single rider approaching under a white cloth tied to a spear. A messenger. The gate remains sealed, the drawbridge stays up. He stops well beyond arrow range and reads from a scroll in a voice that carries surprisingly well. "Surrender," he says, "and you will be spared. Resist, and the castle will be..." You stand there longer than you mean to, staring at the distant figures. Now that the sun is fully risen, you can see more clearly. Rows of tents, supply wagons, a cluster of carpenters already unloading timber. They're building something, maybe ladders, maybe worse. A faint breeze carries the smell of their cooking fires, and it's strangely domestic, almost neighbourly, as if two villages have decided to picnic across a field from one another. But the space between you is charged, a stretched wire humming with future violence. You feel small inside these massive walls, aware that history often reduces days like this to a single line: the siege began at dawn. No one records how your hands shook when you first saw the banners. No one notes the way the sunlight made everything look deceptively ordinary. A bell rings again, sharper this time, not for prayer, but for positions. You glance up at the towers, at the arrow slits cut narrow for defence, at the heavy wooden doors banded with iron. The castle was designed for this, after all. Thick stone to absorb impact. A moat to slow approach. Murder holes above the gate to drop unpleasant surprises on anyone foolish enough to force entry. You once thought those features were dramatic flourishes, architectural bravado. Now they feel intimate, like the muscles of a body preparing to flex. You take a breath that tastes of smoke and morning chill, and step toward the stairs leading to the wall walk. Whatever this day becomes, arrows, hunger, negotiations, fire, it has begun, and you are inside it, sealed within stone that suddenly feels both protective and terribly, terribly finite. You climb the narrow spiral staircase that winds upward inside the tower, your shoulder brushing cold stone worn smooth by generations of hands, and when you emerge onto the battlements the wind greets you first, sharp and insistent, tugging at your tunic as if trying to remind you how exposed you truly are. From up here the world feels both wider and more fragile. The fields beyond the moat stretch out in muted winter colours, and the enemy camp that looked like scattered shadows at dawn now reveals itself in unsettling detail. Rows of canvas tents ripple in the breeze, their banners snapping with bright insignias that catch the light like small declarations of ownership. You can see men moving between cook fires, horses tethered in careful lines, carts unloaded with methodical calm. This is not a raiding party hoping for quick plunder. This is an army prepared to wait. And waiting, you're beginning to understand, is the most dangerous weapon they possess. Behind you, the heavy clank of chains signals the drawbridge rising fully into place, its wooden planks creaking as they tilt upward and lock against the gatehouse. The portcullis has already been lowered, its iron teeth embedded into grooves in the stone, and thick oak doors have been barred from within. You watch as two men slide a massive beam into position across the inner gate, a tree trunk stripped and shaped precisely for this purpose. Castles are designed in layers, outer gate, inner gate, towers flanking every vulnerable point, because history has shown, repeatedly, that a single barrier is never enough. The moat below you glimmers a dull green, its surface broken by lazy ripples. It's not the wide romantic waterway of storybooks, it's narrow and smells faintly of stagnant reeds, but it will slow ladders, carts, and any ambitious soldier who thinks swimming in armour is a clever idea. Spoiler, it isn't. A captain of the guard strides past you, issuing assignments with clipped efficiency. Archers are spaced along the wall walk at measured intervals, careful not to crowd each other. Crossbowmen take positions near the towers, where their heavier weapons can be braced against stone for steadier aim. You notice how the arrow slits, those thin vertical openings you once found almost decorative, are angled to allow a wide field of fire from within, while presenting barely a target from outside. It's engineering shaped by centuries of trial and error. Somewhere below, in the courtyard, the blacksmith has already begun hammering, the rhythmic clang of metal on metal rising like a stubborn heartbeat. He'll be repairing mail, straightening arrowheads, maybe even fashioning spare bolts if the siege stretches longer than anyone wants to admit. The Lord appears again, now properly armoured, the polished curves of his breastplate catching the sun in bright flashes. He surveys the enemy camp through narrowed eyes, and though he stands tall, you sense the calculation behind his stillness. A siege is as much about arithmetic as bravery. How many mouths inside the walls, how many sacks of grain, how many arrows in storage. You overhear him murmur to his steward about sealing the postern gate, that small side entrance rarely used except for quiet errands. It's bricked up from within by midday, stones mortared hastily into place. The message is clear. There will be no slipping out unnoticed, no last-minute escapes. The castle is now a closed world. Down in the inner ward, villagers who sought refuge shuffle uncertainly, clutching bundles of belongings. A woman argues with a guard about retrieving more flour from her cottage beyond the walls, but he shakes his head firmly. Anything left outside is lost. In earlier centuries, some defenders would deliberately burn nearby crops and homes to deny resources to the besiegers, a brutal tactic that turns your own landscape into a weapon. You watch thin plumes of smoke rise from distant fields, and wonder whether that decision has already been made without you knowing. The thought that your familiar paths and hedgerows might be reduced to ash for strategic advantage sits heavily in your chest. You pace along the parapet, glancing down at the courtyard where barrels are being rolled into deeper storage and livestock herded into makeshift pens. Chickens squawk indignantly, unaware that their future has become a matter of careful scheduling rather than casual slaughter. You once complained about the monotony of castle life, about how every day seemed to repeat the last with only minor variations. Now the repetition feels precious. The baker continues kneading dough, though with smaller portions. The laundress hangs damp linens along a sheltered stretch of wall, determined that cleanliness won't be entirely abandoned. Routine, you realise, is a quiet act of defiance. A sudden movement in the enemy camp draws your eye. A line of soldiers begins advancing, not toward the gate but spreading outward, encircling the castle at a cautious distance. They're cutting off every visible path, to the river, to the forest road, to the small trading track that winds toward the hills. It's a tightening ring, subtle but unmistakable. You feel it physically, like fingers closing around your ribs. The realization settles, no messages will leave easily, no traders will arrive. You are, for the foreseeable future, alone with everyone inside these walls. And some of them you barely know. It's funny how intimacy is forced in crisis. That man who irritates you in the stables is now a fellow survivor. A horn blasts from the far side of the field, and you see a small group of enemy riders approaching with deliberate slowness, carrying no visible weapons. Another attempt at negotiation, perhaps, or a show of confidence. The captain beside you spits over the wall and mutters that they'll try to frighten you into surrender before committing to real effort. Historically, many sieges began with psychological warfare, displays of numbers, drums at night, exaggerated rumours whispered by escaped prisoners. Already you can imagine the sleepless evenings ahead, listening for movements in the dark. The sun climbs higher, warming the stone beneath your palms. For a fleeting moment, you allow yourself to notice how beautiful the countryside still looks, the way frost lingers in shaded hollows, the way birds continue to flit between hedges as if nothing has changed. Nature, inconveniently, does not pause for human conflict. A hawk circles lazily above the fields, indifferent to banners and blades. You envy it with a surprising intensity. By midday, the castle feels smaller. Not physically, the towers still rise proudly, the walls still stretch thick and unyielding, but emotionally. Every clang of the gate mechanism, every shouted order echoes more sharply. The kitchen smoke that once felt cosy now seems like a signal flare advertising your presence. You find yourself studying the faces around you, searching for cracks in composure. Fear shows differently in each person. Some grow louder, issuing unnecessary instructions. Others retreat into silence. A young squire near you tries to joke about how at least there'll be no more mucking out the outer fields, and his laugh lands flat against the stone. You lean against the crenellations and look down at the moat again, imagining what it would take to cross it under fire. Ladders would wobble. Siege towers would need firm ground. Battering rams would struggle against the incline. The castle was positioned carefully on this slight rise for exactly these reasons. You trace the line of the walls with your gaze and feel a flicker of pride at their solidity. Yet you also know that even the strongest walls can be undone by time, hunger, or clever engineering. Somewhere in the enemy camp, carpenters are already measuring timber, calculating angles. As the afternoon light shifts toward gold, you sense the day settling into a tense rhythm. The gates are sealed, the world beyond cut cleanly away, and the castle has transformed from home into fortress. The laughter that once drifted across the courtyard has been replaced by measured footsteps and murmured inventories. You inhale deeply, tasting wind and distant smoke, and let the reality anchor itself inside you. This is no longer rumour or distant threat. The drawbridge will not lower tonight. The portcullis will not rise. The ring around you is closed, and everything that matters now exists within these walls of stone and the fragile, determined hearts beating behind them. By late afternoon, the urgency shifts from spectacle to calculation, and you begin to understand that a siege is less a battle and more an accounting exercise performed under the shadow of possible violence. You descend from the battlements back into the keep, where the air is cooler and smells of stone dust, tallow and stored grain, and you find the steward seated at a long trestle table with wax tablets laid out in neat rows, each marked with careful scratches that represent sacks of barley, smoked. Hams, dried beans, salted fish, and wheels of cheese sealed tight against rot. You hover near the doorway at first, watching as he murmurs numbers under his breath, subtracting the newly arrived villagers from what had once been a manageable count of mouths. It is astonishing how quickly abundance becomes scarcity when multiplied by days rather than meals. You hear him instruct the kitchen to reduce portions starting tomorrow, not dramatically, just enough that no one feels the change all at once. It's a subtle strategy, the kind meant to stretch weeks into months if necessary, because the true enemy of any fortress is not always the army outside, but the empty storeroom within. You step closer to help lift a crate of turnips into the deeper cellar, the roots knocking together with dull thuds that echo in the low-vaulted chamber. Torches flicker along the walls, casting shadows that seem to multiply every barrel and sack into phantom supplies you wish were real. A pair of servants roll a cask of ale across the stone floor, grunting with effort. Weak ale will become the daily drink for nearly everyone now, even children, because it is safer than risking too much draw from the well. Wells can be poisoned after all, or simply fouled by overuse, and you can't afford illness spreading through the castle like a second invisible army. You notice the steward marking certain barrels with a symbol indicating they are to remain sealed unless absolutely necessary. Reserves of reserves. There's something almost comforting about the precision of it, the illusion that order can outmaneuver uncertainty. In the kitchens above, the mood has shifted from bustling cheer to measured restraint. The cook, who normally sings loudly and off-key while stirring her pots, now works in thoughtful silence, her ladle moving in slower circles through a cauldron of pottage bulked up with extra water. You catch her eye, and she offers a tight smile that doesn't quite reach her face. Bread loaves are shaped smaller, thinner, as if slimming down for hard times. A boy who usually sneaks crusts when he thinks no one is looking now stands unusually still, aware that each crumb matters. The smell of onions and herbs rises warmly into the rafters, and for a moment the ordinary comfort of food almost convinces you that this is just another day. But then a shout from the yard jolts you back, and you remember the ridge beyond the walls, the steady presence of tents and waiting men. You carry a basket of dried apples down to the undercroft and pause beside the salt room, where slabs of pork hang from hooks like heavy pendulums. Salt is worth its weight in survival here. Without it, meat would spoil quickly, and hunger would tighten its grip sooner than any arrow. You run your fingers along the coarse crystals packed around the cuts, and think about how entire trade routes exist because of this simple mineral, how wars have been fought over it, how something so unremarkable in appearance can decide whether a castle outlasts a siege or collapses into. Desperation. The steward mutters that if rations are managed carefully, the stores could last several months. Several months. The phrase lands heavily, stretching out in your mind like a long, dim corridor. Outside in the courtyard, livestock are being counted with equal care. The old mare you avoided looking at this morning is now tethered alongside the other horses, their breath puffing into the cooling air. Chickens are corralled into tighter pens, and even the single goat brought by the villagers is eyed with quiet calculation. You overhear someone whisper that in other sieges, defenders have resorted to eating animals not usually considered food, ravens, rats, whatever can be trapped. You glance toward the walls where a pair of crows perch confidently, unaware that their status as untouchable symbols might not protect them if hunger sharpens enough. You shake the thought away, focusing instead on the present, on the fact that tonight there will still be bread, still be stew. As evening approaches, the steward gathers a small group, you included, to discuss the distribution plan. Grain will be ground more slowly to reduce waste. Meat will be served every third day instead of daily. Beer will be watered down slightly, though not enough to sap morale entirely. It's a delicate balance. Give too little and spirits crumble, give too much and supplies vanish. You marvel at how leadership in moments like this requires both firmness and empathy. Historically, castles have fallen not because walls were breached, but because internal discord fractured unity. Hungry people argue, fearful people blame. The steward knows this, and so he emphasises fairness, ensuring that even the Lord's table will reflect the new austerity. That gesture alone carries weight, a reminder that survival is communal. You step back into the fading light of the courtyard and notice how the rhythm of the day has shifted. There is less frantic movement now, more deliberate pacing. The initial shock of encirclement has given way to steady preparation. A pair of children chase each other briefly near the well before being scolded into calmer behaviour. The chapel door stands open, a candle flickering inside as if inviting quiet reflection. You find yourself drawn there again, not out of dramatic faith, but because the cool hush offers a break from counting and planning. You sit on the stone bench and listen to the distant murmur of voices beyond the walls, faint, indistinct, but constant. When you emerge, dusk has painted the sky in deep violet hues. Torches are lit along the battlements, their flames dancing in the wind, and you can see similar lights springing up in the enemy camp. It's an eerie mirror image, two communities preparing meals, tending animals, settling in for the night, separated by intent rather than distance. You imagine the men out there also counting their supplies, also calculating how long they can remain before winter or politics pull them elsewhere. A siege is a test of endurance on both sides, and sometimes it is decided not by force, but by which group grows tired first. You're handed a modest bowl of pottage and a slice of bread thinner than usual, and you sit against the inner wall to eat. The stew tastes slightly watered, but still warm and fragrant with time. You chew slowly, aware that savouring each bite has become an act of strategy rather than indulgence. Around you, conversations are subdued, voices lower, as if everyone senses that loudness wastes more than breath. Someone jokes quietly that at least the rationing will improve everyone's figure, and a few tired chuckles ripple outward before fading. As night deepens, the gates remain sealed, the stores secured, and the numbers etched into wax tablets like small promises of survival. You realise that the siege has already changed you in subtle ways. You are thinking in measures and portions, in days and weeks rather than hours. Hunger has not yet arrived, but its shadow has, long and instructive. You look up at the looming keep, its windows glowing faintly with candlelight, and understand that every loaf, every salted slab, every dried apple now carries weight far beyond its size. Within these walls, arithmetic has become destiny, and you are living inside the careful math of endurance. Morning arrives not with birdsong, but with the thrum of tension already stretched tight across the stone, and you wake from shallow sleep aware that the castle has fully transformed into a machine designed for one purpose: to resist. You make your way back up the spiral stairs to the battlements, the grooves in the steps polished by centuries of boots that once climbed in moments just like this, and when you emerge into the pale light, you see that the enemy camp has grown busier, more organised, like a hive stirred into. Productivity. Plumes of smoke rise in orderly lines, and men move in coordinated clusters, hauling timber, hammering beams, shaping something that from a distance looks like a skeletal tower lying on its side. The realization settles slowly. They are preparing siege engines. You swallow and rest your hands on the cold stone parapet, feeling how solid it seems beneath your palms, as if reassuring you that it has faced such threats before. Archers line the wall walk at measured intervals, bows strung and unstrung in rotation to preserve tension in the wood. You watch one man carefully rub beeswax along his bowstring, a small act of maintenance that feels almost tender given the violence it will soon enable. Crossbowmen stand near the crenellations, their heavier weapons resting against the merlons, steel prods gleaming faintly. Crossbows are slower to reload than longbows, but their bolts can punch through armour at closer range, and in the confined theatre of a siege that power matters. You notice how each defender has been assigned a specific stretch of wall, responsibility divided so no gap goes unwatched. The captain moves among them, offering corrections in a low voice, adjusting stances, ensuring fields of fire overlap. The castle, once merely home, now reveals its anatomy. Towers positioned for enfilading fire, arrow slits angled to maximise coverage, machicolations jutting outward above the gate like stone eyebrows, ready to frown down boiling surprises. You lean over the wall and look at the moat again, studying its width and the muddy banks beyond. It isn't grand, but it forces any attacker into a narrow approach. You imagine ladders scraping against the outer face of the wall, defenders pushing them back with poles, rocks tumbling down in chaotic arcs. Above the gatehouse, you spot the murder holes cut into the ceiling of the passageway, small openings through which defenders can drop stones, sand, or worse, onto anyone foolish enough to breach the outer door. You once thought the name melodramatic. Now it feels painfully literal. Somewhere behind you, a barrel of stones has been rolled into place, ready to be tipped at a moment's notice. The blacksmith's hammer rings again from below, steady and relentless. He's repairing mail links, straightening spearheads, shaping spare arrowheads from iron rods heated to orange glow. You pause to watch him work for a moment when you descend briefly to fetch water. Sparks leap into the dim air of his forge, and sweat beads along his brow despite the morning chill. Metalwork is as crucial as muscle in a siege. A snapped bowstring or bent blade at the wrong moment can ripple into catastrophe. He hands you a freshly sharpened dagger to deliver to the armory, its edge catching the light like a thin promise. You carry it carefully, aware that tools once reserved for hunts or minor skirmishes are now central to survival. Back on the wall, the enemy's preparations become clearer. That skeletal shape you saw earlier is being raised upright, beams lashed together with rope, planks nailed into place. A siege tower, likely, tall enough to match your walls and roll forward when complete. You can almost feel the collective intake of breath among the defenders as its outline takes form. Historically, such towers were often covered in wet hides to protect them from fire, and you see men stretching something dark and heavy along its sides. It's methodical, patient work, as if they have all the time in the world. That, perhaps, is the most unnerving part. There is no rush, no desperate charge. Just the slow construction of inevitability. The horn sounds from the enemy camp, and a small group advances cautiously, testing distance. Archers on your side raise their bows in silent unison, arrows nocked but not yet loosed. The captain lifts a hand, signalling restraint. At this range, shots would be wasted. Arrows are finite, every shaft must count. You hadn't thought much about ammunition before, but now you notice the bundles stacked behind each archer, fletchings neatly aligned, and you wonder how long they will last under sustained assault. There is no convenient resupply wagon coming through the gate. The wind picks up, snapping banners and tugging at cloaks, and for a fleeting moment it carries laughter from the enemy camp. It's distant but distinct, a reminder that they too are human, eating breakfast, trading jokes, adjusting armour straps. It unsettles you more than shouting would. War, in theory, feels abstract. Hearing laughter makes it intimate. You shift your weight and glance along the wall at your companions. One man hums under his breath, a tune so ordinary it feels almost rebellious. Another chews on a strip of dried meat with deliberate slowness, conserving both food and nerves. Below, in the inner ward, women and older boys are hauling buckets of water to the base of the towers, forming small reservoirs in case of fire. Fire is the great equalizer in siege warfare. Stone resists arrows, but flames can find their way into wooden roofs and beams. Buckets are lined up in orderly rows, and you help carry a few, the slosh of water steady against your knees. The smell of damp wood mingles with the tang of iron and smoke. You glance upward at the wooden hoardings that project from the top of one tower, temporary galleries built to allow defenders to shoot straight down without exposing themselves. They creak faintly in the wind, but they are solid, reinforced in anticipation of exactly this scenario. By midday, tension hums like a plucked string. The enemy begins to test your range, a single arrow arcing high and falling short into the moat with a muted splash. It's less an attack and more a measurement. A few defenders respond, their arrows flying farther, thudding into the earth just ahead of the opposing line. It becomes a silent conversation of distance and capability. You realise how much of siege warfare is about probing, gauging, adjusting, a grim chess match played in wood and iron. No one wants to commit too early. You rest your forearms on the crenellation and allow yourself a slow breath. The countryside beyond still looks deceptively calm, sunlight glinting off frost, a thin haze lingering over the fields. Somewhere out there, carpenters are tightening bolts on that rising tower, engineers calculating angles for a battering ram you haven't yet seen, but suspect is being assembled. You remember stories of castles undermined from below, tunnels dug to collapse walls, and you glance down at the base of the curtain wall as if you might spot the earth shifting. It looks solid, immovable, but you know stone is only as strong as the ground beneath it. A faint tremor of humour slips through your thoughts. You used to complain about climbing these stairs for guard duty, about the wind ruining your hair, about the monotony of staring at empty fields. Now you would trade a week's rations for a return to boredom. The irony is almost comforting. At least it means you are still capable of noticing absurdity. You adjust the borrowed helmet on your head, its weight unfamiliar, and settle into your assigned stretch of wall. The castle breathes around you, the forge's rhythm, the murmur of rationed meals below, the creak of timber hoardings, the rustle of mail as men shift their stance. Beyond, the enemy continues its patient construction, wood rising against the sky like a slow-growing tree of intention. You feel suspended between two rhythms, the steady preparedness of the defenders and the deliberate advance of the attackers. The first true clash has not yet begun, but the stage is set with meticulous care, and as you stand there, hands resting on ancient stone, you understand that these walls are not merely barriers. They are instruments tuned for resistance, waiting for the moment when silence gives way to the thunder of the first real assault. By the time the sun reaches its highest point, the waiting ends in a way that feels both sudden and long anticipated, like a storm finally breaking after hours of oppressive stillness. You sense it first in the enemy camp, where movement sharpens into intention, clusters of men forming tight units, shields lifted, ladders hoisted onto shoulders. A horn blares, not the idle signal of morning drills, but a sustained, commanding note that carries across the fields and presses against the castle walls like a physical force. Around you, archers straighten, fingers settling on bowstrings with a familiarity that borders on ritual. The captain's voice cuts through the wind, low and precise. Hold. Hold. Your heart beats so loudly you half expect it to echo off the crenellations. Then the first volley rises from the enemy ranks, a dark flock of arrows lifting into the sky before arcing toward you in a whispering rush. For a split second they are almost beautiful, catching the sunlight like fleeting lines of ink against blue. Then they descend. The sound is not a cinematic crash, but a chaotic rattling, wood striking stone, metal glancing off helmets, a dull thud as one embeds itself in the parapet inches from your hand. You flinch despite yourself, ducking instinctively behind the merlin. The stone absorbs most of the impact, doing exactly what it was designed to do centuries ago. The defender beside you mutters a quick prayer and rises to return fire, loose. The command travels down the wall like a spark, and your side answers. Arrows leap outward in disciplined waves, fletchings spinning, shafts hissing through the air. Some find shields, some earth, some flesh. You force yourself not to watch too closely when one of the advancing soldiers stumbles. because distance makes it easier to function. This is no longer abstract preparation, it is exchange, action and reaction in relentless rhythm. Crossbowmen crank their windlasses with steady, practiced motions, bolts snapping forward with brutal efficiency. The slower reload is offset by precision. You see one bolt punch cleanly through a raised shield, the force enough to stagger the man behind it. Below, a group of attackers rushes toward the moat, dragging a long wooden ladder between them. The sight jolts you. It's one thing to imagine ladders, another to see them bounce against the outer wall. Defenders scramble to respond. Poles are thrust outward, hooks catching the ladder's rungs, shoving it back into the water with a splash that sends muddy spray upward. A cheer erupts along your stretch of wall, brief and fierce. But the enemy does not retreat entirely. They fall back just enough to regroup, more arrows raining upward to keep your heads low. You glance toward the gatehouse as a heavier sound reverberates, a deep, rhythmic thud that seems to pulse through stone. Around the bend of the curtain wall, partially obscured, a battering ram is being manoeuvred forward under a crude wooden frame. It hasn't yet reached the gate, but the intention is unmistakable. Rams were often capped with iron heads shaped like beasts, not merely for intimidation, but to focus impact. You imagine the repeated strikes that could splinter even thick oak over time, especially if the attackers managed to set the doors alight. Above the gate passage, defenders shift into position at the murder holes, hauling baskets of stones and sand into place. The castle's architecture, which once seemed ornamental in parts, now reveals its lethal logic. The midday sun beats down, and sweat trickles beneath your borrowed helmet despite the cool air. The smell of smoke and churned earth drifts upward from below. Somewhere along the wall, a man cries out, not in theatrical agony but in sharp surprise, and you risk a glance to see him clutching his upper arm where an arrow has lodged shallowly. Two others drag him back from the parapet, snapping the shaft short and binding the wound quickly before returning to their posts. There is no time for elaborate tending, efficiency reigns. You realise with a strange detachment that most wounds in sieges are not immediately fatal, but dangerous because of infection later. For now, survival means staying upright. Another volley darkens the sky, and this time you feel the wind of an arrow pass so close to your cheek it grazes the edge of your hood. Your breath catches, and you laugh once, a small, incredulous sound, because you can't quite believe how thin the margin is between observation and oblivion. Keep your head, someone mutters beside you, not unkindly. You nod, though your legs feel as though they belong to someone else. The attackers shift tactics, bringing forward larger shields to form a crude protective wall as more men approach with ladders. One ladder finds purchase this time, its hooks biting into the crenellation. A helmeted head rises into view, eyes fierce above the rim of a shield. You grab a stone from the barrel at your feet and hurl it downward with more force than elegance. It strikes the shield and rebounds, but another defender's pole catches the ladder and wrenches it sideways. The climber vanishes from sight with a splash and a curse, swallowed by water. The rhythm of push and counterpush accelerates. Every few minutes, a new ladder attempts ascent, and every few minutes, it is shoved away. To your right, one of the wooden hoardings creaks under the weight of defenders leaning outward to shoot straight down. Their arrows find targets clustered too close to the wall for upward fire. It's a precarious dance. Lean too far and you expose yourself. Lean too little and you waste the opportunity. You realise how much trust is placed in carpenters you've never thanked, in beams and joints assembled with quiet competence months or years before this day. At the gatehouse, the battering ram finally reaches the outer doors. The first strike lands with a resonant boom that vibrates up through your boots. Dust sifts from mortar joints high above. A second strike follows, then a third, the cadence settling into grim determination. Above, defenders drop stones through the murder holes, the heavy thuds followed by muffled shouts below. Someone tips a bucket of sand. Not boiling oil, that dramatic staple is rarer than legend suggests, but heated sand can slip through armor gaps and cause chaos enough to slow momentum. The ram falters briefly as the attackers adjust, then resumes its pounding. Arrows continue to arc overhead, though less densely now as both sides conserve ammunition. You find yourself moving almost automatically, knock, draw, release, the motion growing smoother with repetition. Each shot feels like a small assertion of existence. The noise blends into a strange symphony, wood striking wood, iron ringing against stone, shouted commands overlapping in competing languages, the splash of ladders meeting moat. Time loses its usual markers. Minutes stretch and compress unpredictably. Eventually, as shadows begin to lengthen, the attackers withdraw a few paces, dragging their ram back just out of range. The ladders are abandoned where they fell, some floating awkwardly against the moat's edge. A ragged cheer rises from the walls, not triumphant, but relieved. The first assault has been repelled. You lean heavily against the parapet, lungs burning, fingers trembling from exertion. The castle still stands, its gates unbroken, its walls unbreached. But as you look out over the field, you see that the siege tower continues to rise in the distance, beams locked into place. Hides being stretched taut across its flanks. The ram will return, the ladders will multiply. This midday clash was a test, a probing strike to measure response and resolve. You wipe sweat from your brow and glance along the line of defenders, seeing the same understanding settle across their faces. You have held, for now. And as the enemy retreats to regroup under the slanting sun, you know that today was only the opening move in a longer, harsher contest that has truly, irrecoverably begun. The afternoon does not grant you the courtesy of recovery. Instead, it shifts into something more unpredictable, more volatile, as if the enemy, having tested your walls with wood and muscle, now decides to try flame. You notice the change first in the way small groups break off from the main cluster near the half-built siege tower, dragging what look like bundled sticks wrapped in cloth. At a distance they appear almost harmless, like firewood prepared for a communal meal, but then you see the glint of oil being poured, the deliberate care with which rags are tied and retied. A murmur ripples along your stretch of wall as someone mutters the obvious fire arrows. You swallow and glance down toward the inner ward, where those rows of water buckets sit like quiet insurance policies, suddenly very relevant. The horn blasts again, shorter this time, and the first flaming arrow arcs upward in a lazy, almost graceful curve. It's mesmerizing for half a heartbeat, a bright orange streak against the late afternoon sky, trailing a thin ribbon of smoke. Then it lands with a crackle against the wooden hoarding 2 towers down from you. The dry timber catches faster than you expect, flame licking greedily along the beam. Shouts erupt instantly. 2 defenders drop their bows and seize buckets, scrambling up the steps as another volley follows, several fiery streaks landing across the outer roofs and along the gatehouse. The air fills with the sharp scent of burning pitch, thick and acrid, curling into your lungs. You grab a bucket without waiting to be told, the water sloshing cold against your knuckles as you rush toward the nearest flicker. Heat radiates off the timber, and you fling the water upward, watching it hiss into steam as it strikes the flame. Another bucket follows, then another. The hoarding smokes angrily, but does not fully ignite, the dampened wood refusing to surrender completely. You hear someone shouting to tear down a section before it can spread, and a pair of men begin hacking at a smouldering plank with axes, splintering it free and tossing it outward into the moat below. The splash sends up a cloud of steam that briefly obscures the enemy beyond. More fire arrows rise. Some fizzle out mid-flight, their cloth poorly wrapped, while others strike the courtyard's thatched shed near the stables. A tongue of flame curls along the dry straw roof, and panic flares among the animals below. Horses whinny and stamp, eyes rolling white. You dash down the tower steps with others. heart pounding in a rhythm that matches the crackle overhead. Smoke drifts through the yard, stinging your eyes. 2 stable hands are already climbing onto the low roof, beating at the flames with soaked blankets, while someone else forms a chain from the well, passing brimming buckets hand to hand in frantic coordination. The well rope groans under constant use, the pulley squealing as bucket after bucket is hauled up. You take your place in the chain, muscles burning as you lift and pass, water sloshing onto your boots. The simple act feels both ancient and immediate. Human lines like this have fought fire for centuries, long before ironclad pumps or organised brigades. You glance up at the wall and see defenders still loosing arrows between sprints for water, balancing defence and containment in a precarious dance. The enemy, seeing smoke rise, cheers loudly, mistaking the plume for success. For a moment, a stronger gust of wind feeds the blaze on the stable roof, and flames leap higher, licking dangerously close to the wooden beams beneath. The heat presses against your face, drying sweat instantly. Someone shouts to move the horses, and gates are flung open as the animals are led into the inner yard away from the danger. One horse resists, hooves skidding on stone, and you find yourself gripping its bridle, murmuring nonsense words meant to soothe as you guide it clear. The absurdity flashes through you. In the middle of a siege, you are negotiating with a terrified animal about where to stand. History rarely mentions this part. Eventually, the combined assault of water and frantic labour wins out. The flames sputter, shrink, then dissolve into smoking patches of blackened straw. A cheer breaks out, ragged but genuine, quickly swallowed by the next wave of alarm as another flaming arrow thuds into a wooden cart near the gate. You pivot and run again, stamping out sparks before they can spread. Your arms feel heavy, your breath raw from smoke, but there is no space for fatigue yet. Up on the battlements, defenders adapt quickly. Wet hides are thrown over vulnerable wooden sections, their slick surfaces resisting ignition better than bare timber. Buckets are stationed closer to high-risk points, and small piles of sand are kept ready to smother embers. You return to the wall just as another volley of fire arcs overhead, but this time the flames meet damp surfaces and die more quickly, sputtering out with disappointed hisses. The attackers adjust their aim, targeting the gatehouse roof, but defenders there respond with disciplined volleys that force the torchbearers to retreat a few paces. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows that make the flames appear brighter against the darkening sky. Smoke hangs in uneven layers, drifting across the moat and partially veiling the enemy lines. Through the haze you see movement near the siege tower, men adjusting the wet hides draped along its sides, clearly aware that fire is a two-edged weapon. You can almost admire the grim practicality of it. Every tactic you use, they counter, and vice versa. It is a grim conversation conducted in wood, water, and will. As dusk deepens, the intensity of flaming arrows lessens, perhaps due to dwindling light or limited supply of prepared shafts. The last few streak upward and fall harmlessly into the moat with soft, steaming plunks. A cautious quiet settles, broken only by the crackle of dying embers and the laboured breathing of those who have spent the afternoon in relentless motion. You lean against the parapet, chest heaving, and look down at the courtyard. Blackened patches scar the stable roof, a cart bears a charred edge, and several hoardings show dark stains where flames briefly tasted victory. But the castle stands intact. The smell of smoke lingers, woven into your clothes and hair. You wipe soot from your cheek and glance along the wall at the others. Faces are streaked with ash, eyes rimmed red, but there is a flicker of pride there too. Fire, one of the oldest and most feared weapons in siegecraft, has been met and mastered, at least for now. You know it will return, perhaps with greater force, perhaps in the dead of night when exhaustion dulls reflexes. But tonight, as the sky deepens into indigo and torches are lit once more along the battlements, you feel a fragile, hard-earned steadiness settle over the castle. Below, buckets are refilled and repositioned, charred wood replaced where possible, animals coaxed back into calmer pens. The routine resumes even amid the scorch marks. You inhale carefully, tasting smoke and cool evening air, and let your shoulders drop a fraction. The siege has added fire to its repertoire, and you have answered with water and stubborn coordination. As darkness folds over the fields and the enemy camp glows with scattered points of flame, you understand that survival here depends not only on walls and weapons, but on the quick collective instinct to respond when the sky itself begins to burn. By the time the last wisps of smoke fade into the evening air, the castle exhales into a strange, fragile version of normality, as if everyone has silently agreed that life must continue, not because it is safe, but because stopping would feel like surrender. You descend from the battlements with arms still aching from buckets and bowstrings, and the courtyard greets you with the layered smells of damp ash, trampled straw, and supper thickening in iron pots. The stable roof is patched in rough fashion, dark planks nailed over charred gaps, and the horses stand quieter now, sides rising and falling in heavy rhythm. One of them nudges your shoulder as you pass, and you rub its neck absently, grateful for something solid and warm that doesn't involve strategy. In the kitchens, the cook has resumed her post as if flaming arrows were just an inconvenient interruption. The great cauldron bubbles steadily, steam fogging the low-ceiling beams. She adds a handful of barley with the solemnity of a priest offering incense, measuring more carefully than she did last week, stirring slower to ensure nothing sticks or burns. The bread set to rise earlier has been divided into smaller loaves, and you notice how evenly she slices them, making certain no portion is unfairly thick. Hunger hasn't arrived yet, but anticipation of it has sharpened every movement. You take a wooden bowl from the stack and join the short queue forming along the wall, listening to the quiet murmur of conversation that now replaces the earlier clamour of alarms. Someone mentions the enemy's siege tower, how it seemed taller this afternoon, its dark hides glistening faintly. Another swears they saw wheels being fitted beneath it, thick and iron-rimmed, designed to roll across uneven ground. You imagine it inching forward in days to come, looming against the skyline like a deliberate shadow. But here, in the kitchen's warm glow, those images feel distant for a moment. A ladle dips into the pot and fills your bowl with pottage, thin but fragrant, flecked with herbs and the occasional sliver of carrot. You carry it to a bench and sit among others, knees brushing in the crowded space. Meals under siege become more than sustenance, they are punctuation marks in a day otherwise blurred by vigilance. You blow gently across the surface of the stew and let the heat warm your face. Across from you, a laundress recounts how she nearly slipped on the wet stones while passing buckets earlier, and someone teases her gently about fighting fire more fiercely than the archers fought men. Laughter bubbles up, cautious at first, then freer. It feels almost rebellious to laugh, but it steadies something fragile inside you. You realise that morale, like grain, must be portioned and protected. After supper, you wander toward the chapel again, drawn by the flicker of candlelight spilling onto the worn threshold. Inside, a handful of villagers kneel in quiet clusters, whispering prayers that rise and fall like soft waves. The priest moves between them, offering brief words and a steadying hand on bowed shoulders. In times of siege, belief can become as practical as armour, a way to organise fear into something manageable. You sit at the back, not kneeling this time, simply listening to the low hum of voices and the faint crackle of wax melting. The stone walls here are thickest of all, and the air feels still, insulated from the outer world's aggression. When you step back into the courtyard, night has fully settled, wrapping the castle in deep blue shadow. Torches line the inner walls, their flames smaller and more controlled than the chaotic fire of earlier. Up on the battlements, the watch rotates, fresh eyes replace weary ones, and you notice how even the act of climbing the stairs has grown quieter. boots placed more carefully on stone. The enemy camp glows across the field, a constellation of small fires mirroring your own. It's almost unsettling how similar the two encampments appear from afar. Two communities huddled around warmth, separated by intent rather than distance. You take a slow walk along the inner wall, observing the smaller rhythms unfolding. A seamstress sits near a torch, mending a torn sleeve with steady hands, her needle flashing in the firelight. A boy too young for the wall helps stack spare arrows into neat bundles, aligning feathers with surprising precision. Near the well, two older men argue quietly about whether the enemy will attempt mining beneath the walls, their voices low but urgent. One insists he felt a faint vibration earlier, the other dismisses it as imagination heightened by fear. You glance toward the base of the curtain wall and listen, half expecting to hear the scrape of distant digging. All you hear is wind and the faint murmur of the camp beyond. In the keep's great hall, the Lord has gathered a small council. You pass by the doorway and catch fragments of discussion, ration projections, patrol schedules, the possibility of sending a messenger by night through the least guarded stretch of wall. Carrier birds are mentioned briefly, though no one seems confident that one could slip past watchful eyes outside. Messages during sieges are precious and perilous. A single note reaching allies could mean relief weeks from now, but capture would mean forewarning the enemy. You sense the weight of each decision pressing down on those seated at the long table. You drift toward the stable yard again, drawn by the comforting rustle of hay and the soft snort of animals. One of the stable hands is brushing down the old mare, speaking to her in low tones as if she understands every word. Perhaps she does in her way. Animals often sense tension before humans admit it. You lean against a wooden post and look upward at the patchwork repairs on the roof, the charred edges visible even in low light. It's a quiet reminder of how quickly flame can reshape wood, and how quickly people can reshape their routines in response. Eventually, you make your way back up to the battlements for your assigned watch. The night air is cooler now, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant smoke. Stars prick the sky above, indifferent witnesses to human conflict. You stand between two crenellations and let your gaze drift across the darkened field. Occasionally, a shadow moves in the enemy camp, a guard pacing or a log shifted in a fire. Otherwise, stillness reigns. It's almost peaceful in its own tense way. You rest your hands on the stone and feel its enduring solidity beneath your palms. Below you, the castle continues its muted life, dishes being washed sparingly, candles snuffed one by one, quiet conversations tapering into sleep. Despite the siege, despite the arrows and fire, daily rituals persist. Bread is baked, sleeves are mended, prayers are whispered. The castle is not only a fortress of stone, it is a network of small, stubborn habits, refusing to collapse under pressure. As the hours stretch and the torches burn lower, you find your breathing slowing to match the steady rhythm of the night. The enemy waits beyond the moat, and you wait within the walls, two circles of vigilance separated by water and will. Somewhere below, a baby cries briefly before being soothed. Somewhere above, a cloud drifts across the moon, dimming the light. You remain at your post, alert but grounded, aware that even under siege, life insists on continuing in kitchens and chapels, in stables and sewing corners. And as you stand there in the cool hush, you realize that endurance is not only measured in arrows loosed or fires quenched, but in the quiet determination to keep living as though tomorrow still belongs to you. Sometime past midnight, when the torches have burned low and the castle seems suspended between exhaustion and vigilance, the whispers begin. They do not arrive as loud accusations or dramatic confrontations. They slip through corridors and along stairwells in half-heard fragments, carried on the same draught that makes candles flicker. You catch the first murmur near the well, where two guards lean close together, speaking in tones meant to stay private. Someone claims to have heard scraping beneath the eastern wall. Someone else swears a villager who arrived at dawn has not been seen since dusk. The siege outside is visible and tangible, but the possibility of something shifting beneath your feet or lurking behind familiar faces unsettles you in a different, deeper way. You remain on the battlements a while longer, listening not just for the enemy camp, but for anything unusual within the walls. The night is deceptively calm. Across the field, a few fires glow like watchful eyes, and the half-built siege tower stands as a darker shape against the sky. No arrows fly now, no horns sound. Instead, the silence feels heavy, as if waiting for a quieter tactic. You recall that some sieges are decided not by brute force, but by patience and subterfuge. Tunnels dug under curtain walls, bribes slipped to discontented servants, secret gates opened at the worst possible hour. The thought makes you glance over your shoulder at the narrow postern door that has been hastily sealed with stone. It looks secure, but stone can be chipped away as surely as wood can be burned. When your watch ends, you descend the spiral stairs, the stone cool beneath your fingertips. Instead of returning directly to your sleeping corner, you drift toward the eastern wall, where the rumour of scraping supposedly began. 2 men are already there, crouched near the base of the curtain wall with their ears pressed to the stone. You feel slightly foolish imitating them, but you kneel anyway, cheek brushing the cold surface. At first you hear nothing but your own pulse and the faint hum of wind outside. Then, maybe, just maybe, there is a dull, irregular thud, so faint it could be imagination. One of the men lifts his head, eyes wide, and whispers that miners can undermine a wall by digging beneath it, propping the tunnel with timber and then burning the supports to collapse the stone above. You picture the ground hollowing silently, the tower above you tilting without warning. It's a tactic used often enough in long sieges to warrant real fear. A decision is made quickly. At first light, a countermeasure will begin, digging a listening shaft inside the wall to detect and intercept any tunnel. For now, additional guards are stationed along the eastern stretch, instructed to listen for vibrations. You rise and brush dust from your knees, feeling the castle shift subtly in your perception. It is no longer only a barrier, it is a body that might be hollowed from beneath. As you move back through the inner ward, you notice a small cluster of villagers gathered near the stables, speaking in low, urgent tones. When they see you approach, their conversation falters. Suspicion, once introduced, spreads quickly. The newcomers from the hamlet are eyed with faint wariness, not because they have done anything wrong, but because they were outside only yesterday. Could someone among them have been coerced into signalling the enemy? The thought feels unfair, yet siege logic is not gentle. You recall that in past conflicts, desperate attackers have offered gold or safe passage to anyone willing to open a gate at night. Hunger and fear are persuasive currencies. Inside the keep, the Lord's Council has reconvened despite the hour. You pause near the doorway, hearing sharper tones than earlier. The possibility of mining is discussed, along with the need to rotate guards more frequently to prevent fatigue from dulling senses. A trusted steward suggests inspecting every storeroom lock at dawn, ensuring no one has tampered with supplies. The conversation drifts toward the idea of secret passages, old escape routes rumoured to snake from the keep to the forest beyond. You have heard those stories too, tales of hidden corridors used generations ago to slip messengers past besieging armies. No one seems entirely certain whether such a passage truly exists here, or if it is a comforting myth. Still, a small search party is proposed, just in case. You finally settle onto your pallet near the great hall, though sleep proves elusive. The straw beneath you rustles as you shift, every creak of timber overhead magnified in your mind. You think of the faint thud you might have heard through the wall. You think of the villagers' guarded glances. You think of the sealed postern door, and wonder how many other small vulnerabilities might exist, unnoticed until too late. The siege outside feels almost straightforward compared to this internal uncertainty. An enemy across the moat is easier to face than a hidden doubt within the walls. Dawn arrives grey and subdued, as if the sky itself is cautious. Work begins immediately along the eastern wall. Labourers armed with picks and shovels start digging a narrow shaft a few paces inside the curtain, aiming downward at an angle to intersect any potential tunnel. The sound of metal biting into earth echoes dully in the morning air. You join the effort briefly, hauling baskets of loosened soil away from the growing pit. The earth smells damp and mineral-rich, a grounding scent that contrasts sharply with last night's smoke. Each scrape of shovel is both reassurance and risk. Reassurance that you are acting, risk that you might indeed uncover proof of an enemy beneath. Mid-morning, one of the diggers freezes, holding up a hand for silence. Everyone leans closer. There it is again, faint but distinct this time. A rhythmic knock from somewhere beyond the soil. It is not loud, not dramatic, but it is real enough to tighten your throat. The captain orders the digging to continue more aggressively, aiming toward the source. Countermining, you realise, is as much about nerve as strength. Two unseen groups burrowing toward each other in darkness, separated by only a few feet of earth. You imagine the moment when tunnels meet, when light from your torches spills into the attacker's passage and both sides confront each other underground in cramped chaos. While the digging continues, another development stirs above. A guard reports seeing a brief flash of light from a tower window at dawn, like a mirror catching the sun. Signalling? Or simply coincidence? The suspicion circles back to the villagers. An inspection of rooms begins quietly. Chests opened, bedding shaken, small possessions examined for hidden notes. You watch as one family stands aside, faces pale with indignation, while guards search their corner of the hall. Nothing is found, but the damage to trust lingers. You feel the fragile fabric of unity stretch thin, threads strained by fear. By midday, the digging shaft has deepened enough that the knocking grows clearer, unmistakably deliberate. There is an enemy tunnel. The realization spreads through the castle not as panic, but as a grim, focused urgency. More men join the effort, widening the shaft to allow movement below. Buckets of soil are hauled up in steady rhythm, arms straining, backs slick with sweat despite the cool air. The castle above continues its routines, bread baked thinner, sleeves mended tighter, but beneath the surface, a hidden contest is unfolding. As you stand near the edge of the pit, listening to the muted thuds that signal proximity, you understand that the siege has shifted into a new dimension. It is no longer only walls against ladders, fire against water. It is earth against earth, patience against patience, suspicion against solidarity. You glance around at the faces illuminated by torchlight within the shaft, at the villagers waiting anxiously above, at the guards scanning windows for flashes of betrayal. The enemy presses from without and below, while within, trust becomes as critical as stone. You inhale the cool morning air, tinged faintly with damp soil, and steady yourself. The castle is learning to listen, to walls, to earth, to whispers, and as the digging continues and the knocking grows louder, you realise that survival now depends not only on strength of stone, but on the fragile decision to stand together even as doubt prowls the corridors. Night falls heavier than before, as if the sky itself has lowered closer to the battlements, pressing down with a quiet that feels almost deliberate. The digging along the eastern wall has paused for the moment, not because the threat is gone, but because men can only swing picks so long before arms tremble and judgment falters. The shaft now yawns a few feet deep inside the curtain wall, torches planted at its edge casting long, shivering shadows that make the stone seem alive. You stand again upon the battlements, the cool air brushing soot and soil from your skin, and look out at the enemy camp glowing across the dark field. Their fires burn steadier tonight, fewer sudden movements visible, as if they too are conserving strength for something quieter, subtler. The stars above are sharp and numerous, unbothered by the tension below. You find yourself tracking constellations you half remember from calmer evenings, tracing familiar shapes as if they could anchor you. Somewhere along the wall, a guard clears his throat softly, and the sound feels loud in the hush. The captain has doubled the watch along the eastern stretch, rotating men more frequently so no one grows complacent. Fatigue is a subtle adversary. A single blink too long can invite disaster. You shift your weight and rest your palms on the stone, feeling its chill seep into your skin, grounding you in the present moment. A faint scraping sound reaches you, barely audible above the whisper of wind. You freeze, straining to isolate it from the rustle of cloaks and the creak of timber. There, again, not from below this time, but from somewhere beyond the moat. You narrow your eyes and peer into the darkness. At first you see nothing unusual, only the familiar line of earth and the dim silhouette of the half-finished siege tower. Then you notice a cluster of shapes moving low to the ground, shielded by darkness. The enemy is advancing quietly, not with ladders raised high or horns blaring, but with measured stealth. A signal passes down the wall in hushed urgency. Archers knock arrows without the usual shouted command, movements practiced and economical. The first shot from your side is almost gentle, a single arrow released to test the distance. It disappears into the dark with a faint hiss. A heartbeat later, a cry rises from the field, and the shapes scatter slightly. So much for stealth. The quiet skirmish begins, arrows exchanged in smaller numbers than midday, each side probing for weakness rather than overwhelming with force. You glimpse figures carrying bundles again, but these are not flaming shafts. They kneel near the moat's edge, fumbling with something unseen. A guard beside you whispers that they may be trying to fill sections of the moat with fascines, bundles of sticks thrown in to create makeshift crossings. It is a tactic used often enough in long sieges, simple but effective if left unchallenged. You lean outward between the crenellations and release an arrow toward the nearest movement. The response is immediate. A cluster of enemy archers rise and send a volley back, forcing you to duck as shafts clatter against stone. Below, defenders rush to the moat's inner edge with poles, prepared to push away any accumulating debris. In the dim light, it becomes a tense game of inches. Bundles of brush splash into the water, and men strain to hook and drag them aside before they can stack high enough to matter. The sound of splintering wood and splashing water blends with the steady thrum of distant digging beneath the eastern wall, creating a layered rhythm that feels almost surreal. As the skirmish continues, a sudden shout erupts from the digging shaft. You pivot, heart-jolting, and see a plume of dust rise from the pit. The countermine has intersected something. Torches are thrust downward, and for a moment you glimpse a darker void within the earth, the enemy tunnel breached. A clash of metal echoes faintly from below as men descend into the cramped space, blades drawn. The battle beneath the ground is muffled but intense, shouts compressed by soil and stone. It feels like the castle itself is fighting from within, its foundations alive with resistance. Up on the wall, the enemy's nighttime probing continues, but it falters as news spreads that their tunnel has been discovered. You hear a change in their tone, less coordinated, more hurried. Arrows still arc upward, but with diminishing frequency. One strikes the wooden merlon near your shoulder, quivering in place. You pull it free and toss it aside, aware that even small trophies of survival carry weight in moments like this. The moon emerges from behind a cloud, silvering the field and revealing the scattered bundles of brush floating uselessly in the moat. The defenders below seize the opportunity to drag them fully away, breaking up any progress the attackers hoped to make. On the eastern side, the underground clash intensifies briefly, then subsides into heavy breathing and the scrape of tools. Word travels quickly along the wall. The enemy tunnel was shallow, poorly supported, and when your men broke through, panic spread among the miners. Timber props were set alight from your side, smoke filling their passage and forcing retreat. Earth shifts and settles with a dull, ominous rumble, and you imagine their tunnel collapsing into itself, a silent rebuke to patience and cunning. For a moment, a fragile stillness returns. The enemy withdraws a few paces, regrouping in the shadow of their campfires. The siege tower stands unchanged, its bulk patient and ominous, but tonight it remains motionless. You exhale slowly, realizing how tightly you had been holding your breath. The castle has repelled not only ladders and fire, but hidden earthworks and midnight crossings. Yet you know such attempts will not cease entirely. They will adapt, refine, return. As the hours stretch toward dawn, the sky lightens imperceptibly, shifting from black to deep indigo. The torches along the wall burn lower, their flames smaller and steadier. Beneath your feet, the digging shaft is being reinforced, widened to prevent any renewed undermining. Guards rotate again, quieter now, exhaustion etched into their movements. You feel it too, a heaviness behind your eyes, a tremor in your hands that you steady by gripping stone. You look once more across the field. The enemy camp appears subdued, its fires reduced to embers. Somewhere out there, they too are tending to wounded, recalculating strategies, perhaps arguing over failed attempts. War at night strips away spectacle, leaving only breath and heartbeat and the knowledge that survival hinges on attention. When the first faint blush of dawn touches the horizon, you allow yourself a small, tired smile. The night has passed without breach. The moat remains a barrier. The wall stands firm, the undermining thwarted, for now. You roll your shoulders, stiff and sore, and step back from the crenellation as the watch changes once more. The castle has endured another test in darkness, answering stealth with vigilance, suspicion with action. And as morning's pale light spreads across the scarred field, you understand that in siege, night is not rest but trial, and you have met it, breath by breath, without yielding. By the fourth morning, or perhaps the fifth, time has begun to blur into a single stretched thread. The siege no longer feels like an event, but a condition, something woven into the air you breathe and the way you move. The first light reveals a courtyard that looks almost ordinary at a glance, smoke rising from the kitchen vent, a stable hand leading a horse in slow circles, a pair of children carrying small bundles of kindling under watchful eyes. But there is a subtle thinning everywhere, a quiet subtraction that touches each routine. Bread loaves are smaller still, the pottage is paler, stretched with more water and fewer vegetables. You notice how people scrape their bowls clean now, not out of greed but instinct. The steward's wax tablets have grown crowded with marks, each scratch representing a choice made and a day survived. You stand nearby as he recalculates in low murmurs, adjusting for the extra labourers who have joined the digging efforts and therefore require slightly larger portions to maintain strength. It is a delicate balancing act. Too little food and the defenders weaken, too much and the reserves vanish faster than expected. Historically, sieges are often decided by such arithmetic rather than valour, and you can see that truth etched in the lines of the steward's face. He subtracts, pauses, then nods faintly, as if convincing himself the numbers still favour endurance. Hunger, even in its early stages, changes the way the castle sounds. Conversations are softer, not just from caution, but from conservation. Laughter still appears, but thinner, like a ribbon stretched too far. You find yourself thinking about food more often. Not grand feasts, just simple things, a thick slice of bread, an apple eaten without calculation. The mind narrows when sustenance is measured, yet morale must be guarded as fiercely as the gate, and so small comforts are preserved where possible. A musician brings out a battered lute one evening, and plays a slow, familiar tune in the great hall. The melody is imperfect, strings slightly out of tune, but the act itself steadies something fragile in the room. In the infirmary corner near the chapel, another quiet threat emerges. A wounded guard from the first assault develops a fever. his arms swelling despite careful binding. Infection, invisible and patient, is as dangerous in siege conditions as any arrow. The air inside the hall grows stale with so many bodies sharing close quarters, and you notice more frequent trips to the well for washing hands and faces. Herbs are brewed into bitter infusions meant to ward off sickness, and sprigs of rosemary are hung near pallets in the belief that their scent can cleanse the air. Whether science or superstition, the effort to protect health becomes urgent. You help carry fresh straw to replace bedding that has grown damp, aware that rotten mould thrive in confinement. Latrine pits are monitored more strictly now, covered carefully to prevent foul smells from drifting too far. Medieval castles were not strangers to unpleasant odours even in peace, but under siege the risk of disease multiplies. Cleanliness becomes a strategic act. You find yourself scrubbing your hands more often, though water is precious, rubbing them dry against your tunic as if friction alone could banish unseen dangers. On the battlements, activity has slowed but not ceased. The enemy camp remains steadfast, their siege tower nearly complete now, its height matching your walls with unnerving precision. They have ceased large assaults for the moment, perhaps conserving energy as you are. It is a mutual waiting game. From the wall, you can see them tending small garden plots scratched hastily into the earth, an unsettling sign of long-term intention. They mean to stay. The realization sinks in quietly. Rumours ripple again through the castle, this time less about betrayal and more about omens. A crow lands on the highest tower and refuses to leave despite shouts and thrown pebbles. Some whisper it is a sign of death, others insist it is merely a bird enjoying the vantage point. You catch yourself staring at it longer than necessary, half expecting it to deliver a prophecy. Siege compresses rational thought, making space for strange interpretations. Someone claims that if the crow remains at sunset, the enemy will attack at dawn. You almost smile at the absurd specificity, yet you note the sunset carefully all the same. Rations tighten another notch by week's midpoint. Meat is now reserved for those stationed on the most demanding posts, the diggers reinforcing the countermine, the archers rotating through extended watches. You receive a slightly larger ladle of stew one evening after a long shift hauling soil, and the warmth spreads through you with disproportionate gratitude. Around you, others accept their thinner portions with stoic nods. Fairness matters more than abundance now. The knowledge that sacrifice is shared keeps resentment from taking root. The Lord walks the courtyard more frequently, not armoured for battle but visible, speaking briefly with stable hands and laundresses alike. His presence, even without dramatic speeches, reassures many. Leadership during siege is less about grand declarations and more about consistency, being seen, being steady. You observe how he eats the same rationed bread as everyone else, perhaps slightly better cut, but not extravagantly so. Such gestures ripple outward, quiet but powerful. As days pass, you feel your body adjusting to the new normal. Hunger becomes a background hum rather than a sharp pang. Sleep comes in shorter stretches, interrupted by watch rotations and the occasional distant thud from the enemy camp as they test their engines. You find yourself conserving movement, speaking less, listening more. Even the children seem subdued, their games quieter, their steps lighter. One afternoon, a small incident shakes the fragile equilibrium. A sack of grain is discovered torn, its contents partially spilled and spoiled. Suspicion flares briefly. Sabotage? Theft? But closer inspection reveals gnawed edges, tiny droppings nearby. Rats. In confinement, they multiply quickly, drawn by stores of food. A campaign against them begins almost immediately. Traps set, cats encouraged into storerooms. It feels absurd, waging war on rodents while a siege rages outside, yet their threat is real. Grain lost to pests is grain not eaten by defenders. You help set a simple trap near the cellar stairs and reflect on how survival now hinges on vigilance at every scale, from towering siege engines to small whiskered intruders. Evenings grow quieter as energy wanes. The lute plays less frequently, conversations shorten, yet there are moments of stubborn humanity. Someone shares a story of a siege from decades past, where defenders held out so long that the attackers eventually withdrew in frustration. The tale may be embellished, but it plants a seed of endurance. If others have lasted, perhaps you can too. One night, as you stand watch beneath a sky veiled by thin cloud, you realise the castle has settled into a rhythm of attrition. Hunger and hope now walk side by side along the parapets. You feel both within yourself, the ache of reduced portions, the flicker of belief that patience might yet outlast pressure. Across the field, the enemy camp remains steady, their tower looming, their fires dim but persistent. You rest your hands on the stone, feeling its enduring strength, and breathe slowly. The siege grinds on not with dramatic clashes, but with the slow erosion of comfort and certainty. Yet within these walls, life persists, thinner, quieter, but unbroken. And as you watch the dark horizon for any sign of movement, you understand that endurance is not a single act of bravery, but 1,000 small decisions to keep going, even when the stew is thinner and the nights are longer than you ever imagined. The morning the earth shifts, you feel it before you understand it. A faint tremor underfoot that could be dismissed as imagination if not for the way a fine line of dust trickles down the inner face of the eastern wall like a silent warning. You are halfway through hauling a basket of damp soil from the countermine shaft when the ground beneath the keep seems to exhale. Not violently, not yet, but enough that conversations falter and eyes turn instinctively toward the curtain wall. The enemy has not abandoned their underground ambitions after all. They have simply adjusted, digging deeper, farther from your initial interception, patient as roots seeking water. The captain's orders snap through the courtyard with renewed urgency. Reinforce the shaft. Widen the listening trench. Shore up the interior base of the wall with additional timber supports. You drop your basket and join the effort, muscles already weary from days of rationed strength. The shaft smells strongly of damp clay and sweat, torches casting thick shadows that seem to move with the flicker of flame. You descend carefully into the narrow space, boots sliding slightly against loose soil. The air grows heavier as you go, tinged with something metallic, the scent of disturbed earth long sealed from sunlight. There it is again, a muffled thud, followed by a faint scrape. This time there is no doubt. The enemy miners are close, separated from you by only a few feet of packed soil. One of your diggers presses his ear to the wall of earth, eyes narrowing and gestures for silence. The rhythm of the knocking is deliberate, coordinated. They are shoring up their tunnel with timber, preparing perhaps to burn the supports and bring down a section of wall above. It is a method proven over decades of siegecraft. Collapse the foundation, let gravity finish what ladders cannot. Above ground, another threat simmers. The infirmary has grown more crowded. The guard with the wounded arm now lies feverish, his skin hot to the touch, breath shallow. A second man, uninjured in battle, has developed a cough that rattles in his chest. Close quarters and dwindling nutrition create fertile ground for illness, and whispers of contagion ripple through the hall. The priest moves between pallets with a bowl of herb-steeped water, murmuring reassurances, while the cook prepares thin broths easier to swallow. You feel the tension shift inward again. While the earth is being contested below, the body is being contested within. In the shaft, a decision is made quickly and grimly. Rather than wait for the enemy to ignite their supports, you will attempt to disrupt their tunnel directly. Barrels of damp wood and pitch are lowered carefully, positioned near the thin wall of soil separating you from them. The plan is simple in theory. Smoke them out, choke their passage, Force retreat before they can collapse your own wall. It is dangerous work. You help wedge a barrel into place, fingers brushing rough wood slick with moisture. The torch is brought close, flame licking tentatively at the edge before catching. Smoke begins to curl upward, thick and choking in the confined space. Within moments, coughing erupts from the other side of the thin earthen barrier. The enemy miners had not expected counterfire so swiftly. You hear frantic scraping, hurried shouts muffled by soil. The smoke grows denser, eyes stinging, lungs protesting. Someone shouts to retreat up the shaft before the fumes overwhelm you as well. You scramble upward, heart pounding, emerging into cooler air with a gasp. The ground trembles again, slightly stronger this time, followed by a dull, hollow boom as part of the enemy tunnel collapses inward. A cloud of dust rises from the eastern base of the wall, but the stone above remains intact. Cheers erupt briefly, raw and relieved. The immediate threat of collapse has been averted. But victory is complicated. The smoke drifting upward has left several of your own diggers wheezing, eyes red, throats raw. One man stumbles and must be carried to the infirmary, his breathing laboured. Underground warfare offers little glory and plenty of consequence. As the day progresses, the enemy's frustration becomes visible above ground. Their siege tower inches forward for the first time since completion, its massive wheels groaning as men strain to push it across uneven terrain. The dark hides draped over its sides glisten faintly where they have been kept wet, protection against the very flames you used earlier in the week. It looms larger now, its top platform nearly level with your battlements. You feel the scale of it in your chest, a moving wall meant to negate your own. Archers reposition along the threatened stretch, aiming for any exposed wheel or support beam. Bolts thud into wood, some sticking, others deflecting harmlessly. The enemy responds with covering fire, arrows whistling past in increasingly dense arcs. You duck and rise in practiced rhythm, loosing shots when opportunity presents itself. The clash feels inevitable now, less probing and more committed. Below, in the infirmary, the cough has spread. 2 more villagers complain of tight chests and aching limbs. The air in the great hall feels thicker despite attempts to ventilate with propped doors and small braziers meant to purify. You help carry fresh straw to replace bedding once more, though supplies of clean straw are dwindling. It strikes you that a siege does not merely test walls, it tests air, water, immune systems. Disease has felled more castles than battering rams in certain eras, and the thought presses heavily against your resolve. Rations are reduced again, subtly but unmistakably. Bread slices now verge on translucent. The stew contains more water than grain. You chew slowly, forcing your body to accept less without complaint. Across the table, someone mutters that at least thinner meals make climbing the battlements easier. A few weary smiles flicker in response. Humour persists, stubborn as weeds in stone cracks. By late afternoon, the siege tower halts just beyond the moat's edge, its presence oppressive even at rest. The enemy appears to be preparing a bridge or ramp to span the water. You watch them work with mechanical patience, aware that each adjustment brings them closer to direct confrontation atop the walls. The castle feels both resolute and fragile, like a body bracing for impact. As dusk approaches, the ground remains steady beneath your feet, no further tremors from below. The countermine has held for now, the enemy tunnel choked with smoke and collapse. Yet you know they may begin again elsewhere, shifting tactics as fluidly as you must. Within the walls, the infirmary grows quieter, the fevered guard drifting in and out of awareness while the priest whispers soft reassurances. You pause beside him briefly, offering a cup of watered ale to moisten his lips, aware that survival is now measured not just in repelled assaults, but in breaths maintained. When night finally drapes itself over the castle once more, you stand upon the battlements and look down at the looming tower across the moat. The air smells faintly of smoke and damp earth, mingled with the subtle sourness of too many bodies confined too long. You rest your hands on the stone and feel its endurance, solid and ancient. Beneath it, earth has shifted and been contested. Within it, bodies strain and falter. Beyond it, engines gather force. The siege has entered a deeper phase now, one where foundations and lungs alike are tested, and as you breathe carefully in the cooling dark, you understand that endurance means guarding not only the visible walls, but the unseen spaces below and the fragile flesh within. The morning they raise the banner of Pali, it feels almost surreal, as though the siege itself has grown tired and wishes to pause for breath. You see it first from the battlements, a strip of pale cloth lifted high on a spear, advancing slowly toward the moat with deliberate care. No horns sound, no arrows fly. The siege tower stands silent behind them, massive and patient, while the enemy camp seems to hold itself in check. A murmur travels along the wall, equal parts suspicion and cautious relief. You narrow your eyes against the pale light of dawn, watching the small delegation approach to just beyond arrow range, hands visible, movements measured. The captain orders a temporary ceasefire posture, bows lowered but not unstrung, crossbows held ready though not aimed. The drawbridge remains raised, the portcullis firmly in place. You descend partway to the gatehouse to listen as the lord emerges above the inner gate, flanked by 2 armoured guards. His face is composed, though thinner than it was a week ago. Rations and responsibility carve similar lines. The enemy spokesman calls out across the water, voice amplified by cupped hands and the natural acoustics of stone. He offers terms, surrender now, and lives will be spared, resist further, and when the tower advances, mercy will be scarce. It is the ritual of siege, repeated countless times across history, negotiation framed by threat. You study the enemy envoy's posture. He looks confident but not reckless. Perhaps they too feel the strain of waiting. Perhaps supplies in their camp are not as abundant as they appear. Sieges drain both sides, though one suffers confinement while the other suffers exposure. Your lord listens without visible reaction, then responds with measured defiance. The castle will not yield. Not yet. The envoy nods once, as if expecting that answer, and withdraws at the same unhurried pace. As the white banner recedes, a quiet settles heavier than before. Pali has not brought peace, it has merely clarified the stakes. The Lord calls a brief council in the Great Hall, and though you are not among the seated decision-makers, you linger near the doorway as fragments of strategy drift outward. The siege tower will advance soon. Preparations must be sharpened. Pitch reserves are inventoried. Arrows counted once more. The countermine shaft is to be monitored continuously in case the enemy resumes underground efforts elsewhere. The conversation does not waver towards surrender, but you sense how thin the margin has become. Disease presses inward, grain dwindles steadily. The castle stands, but it does so with effort. By midday, the enemy confirms the shift from words to action. The siege tower lurches forward again, wheels grinding over earth reinforced with planks. Men push in coordinated rhythm, shields raised to protect against your archers' attempts to disrupt progress. You take your position along the battlements, fingers brushing the fletching of an arrow before knocking it. The tower seems larger now, not because it has grown, but because it is closer, its upper platform level with your own, its dark hides still damp and resistant. Loose. The command ripples along the wall. Arrows arc outward, striking the tower's sides with dull thuds. Some embed deeply, others glance away. Crossbow bolts follow, punching with greater force, and you see one support beam splinter under repeated hits. But the structure holds. The enemy responds with volleys from the tower's slits, arrows whistling dangerously close to your position. One defender to your left staggers backward, a shaft lodged in his thigh. He grits his teeth and is dragged to safety, leaving a faint smear on the stone that someone quickly covers with sand. Below at the gatehouse, preparations intensify. Buckets of water and sand are positioned along the wall's crest. Bundles of kindling soaked in pitch are readied. intended not to ignite the tower directly, its wet hides would resist that, but to target the bridge they are constructing to span the moat. If the ramp burns, the tower cannot close the final distance. You watch as enemy engineers begin lowering a thick wooden platform from the tower's front, angled toward the water's edge. It inches downward, rope mechanisms creaking audibly even across the field. The moment the platform touches the moat's near bank, defenders unleash a concentrated barrage. Arrows target the ropes and pulleys. Crossbow bolts seek exposed hands and faces. You add your own shot to the storm, aiming for a gap where wood meets iron. The platform wobbles but remains intact. Enemy soldiers surge forward beneath it, attempting to secure its base against your interference. A tense exchange unfolds, push and counterpush magnified atop wood and stone. At the eastern wall, smoke rises again from the countermine shaft. The enemy has resumed digging elsewhere, perhaps hoping to divide your focus. You feel the castle straining, forced to respond on multiple fronts simultaneously. Yet coordination holds. Orders are relayed swiftly. Diggers rotate with archers, buckets move where needed. Even in fatigue, the defenders operate with practiced cohesion. As the afternoon sun lowers, the siege tower finally meets the wall's height. Its upper platform aligns with your battlements, separated only by a narrow, precarious bridge. For a breathless moment, both sides hesitate. Then the first enemy soldier charges across, shield raised. He meets a wall of defenders at the crenellations, shields locked, spears thrusting. The clash is immediate and close, far different from the distant exchange of arrows. You find yourself shoulder to shoulder with others, pushing against a wooden edge slick with moisture. The air fills with shouts and the clang of steel. You thrust with a spear borrowed from a fallen comrade, aiming not with rage but with grim necessity. The bridge shudders under combined weight. A defender beside you hurls a clay pot filled with sand downward, blinding an attacker long enough for another to shove him back across the narrow span. The fighting is chaotic but contained. The bridge allows only a few men at a time to cross, preventing the full force of the enemy from overwhelming you instantly. Then, amid the clash, a shout rises from below. The kindling at the base of the bridge has caught. Flames lick upward along the wooden supports where the hides do not fully cover. Smoke curls around the tower's front, seeping into slits and forcing attackers to retreat momentarily. The bridge trembles again, and you feel heat against your face. Someone yells to fall back a pace. The enemy pulls their men from the span just as fire consumes a critical joint. With a splintering crack, part of the bridge collapses into the moat, sending debris and embers hissing into water. A ragged cheer erupts from your side, raw and disbelieving. The tower remains standing, but its immediate access to the wall is severed. Enemy soldiers scramble to extinguish the flames, but the damage is done for now. They withdraw the tower a few yards, regrouping under cover of shields as dusk approaches. You lean heavily against the parapet, chest heaving, hands trembling not from cold, but from proximity. The parley offered surrender, the afternoon delivered collision. The castle has held again, though barely. Across the field, the siege tower looms still, scorched at its front but not destroyed. It will return, repaired and reinforced. As twilight deepens, you watch the enemy camp settle once more into uneasy quiet. Within your walls, wounded attended, buckets refilled, arrows gathered from stone and earth to be reused where possible. The Lord walks the battlements slowly, nodding to those who stood firm. No grand speech follows, only steady presence. You rest your hands on the scarred stone and gaze out at the darkening field. Negotiation has failed. The final stand inches closer with every failed bridge and collapsed tunnel. Yet here you remain, within walls blackened and battered but unbroken. And as night folds over both camps alike, you understand that survival now hinges not on a single dramatic victory, but on enduring one more assault, and then another, until one side finally yields to exhaustion. Dawn arrives softly after the longest night yet, not with the shrill urgency of horns or the thunder of rams, but with a pale wash of light that seeps over the battlements and settles gently on scorched wood and scarred stone. You are already awake when it comes, having slept in fragments against the inner wall, your dreams tangled with smoke and collapsing tunnels. For a moment, in that grey hush before full sunrise, the field beyond the moat looks almost peaceful. Mist clings low to the ground, blurring the outline of the enemy camp, softening the angles of the half-charred siege tower. It feels as though the world itself has drawn a slow breath and is holding it. You rise stiffly and step toward the crenellation, palms resting against stone that has grown familiar in its endurance. The tower remains where it was pulled back, darkened at the front where flame licked through the bridge. No movement yet, no banners raised for assault. You scan the camp more carefully and notice something subtle but unmistakable, fewer figures moving between tents. The fires are smaller. Wagons stand partly loaded. At first you tell yourself it is caution, perhaps a regrouping before another attempt. But then you see it, a line of soldiers dismantling part of the outermost encampment, canvas folded rather than stretched, ropes coiled instead of tightened. A murmur spreads along the wall as others notice. No one cheers yet. Siegers have been known to feign retreat to lure defenders into reckless pursuit. You remain watchful, eyes narrowed against the growing light. Another hour passes, and the pattern becomes clearer. Sections of the camp are being taken down systematically. The siege tower remains, but the energy around it has shifted from aggression to assessment. A rider departs toward the distant road, followed by two more. The tightening ring around your castle seems to loosen, thread by cautious thread. Within the walls, word travels quickly. The Lord ascends the battlements to see for himself, expression guarded. He orders continued vigilance, no lowering of the drawbridge yet, no celebration. You sense the collective tension of days compressed into this single uncertain morning. Hunger still gnaws. The infirmary remains occupied, the fevered guard drifting between clarity and delirium. The grain stores are thinner than they were a week ago. Victory, if this is victory, will not restore what has been spent. By midday, there is no denying it. The enemy camp shrinks visibly. Tents disappear in rows. Supply wagons creak away in dusty procession. The siege tower, once an omen of imminent breach, is partially dismantled, its great beams stripped of useful parts. Perhaps reinforcements fail to arrive. Perhaps their own supplies dwindled. Perhaps a rival lord threatens their lands elsewhere, demanding attention. Sieges end for many reasons, and rarely are all revealed to those within the walls. What matters is the unmistakable retreat. A sound begins low in the courtyard, not a shout, not yet, but a tremor of disbelief. Then it swells into something brighter. Cheers rise from the battlements, ragged and incredulous. You feel it surge through you like warmth after prolonged cold. Your hands grip the stone harder, as if to confirm it is real. Across the field, the last line of soldiers turns away, banners dipping slightly as they march toward the horizon. The space between you widens not with threat, but with absence. Even then, caution holds you in place. The drawbridge remains raised until the enemy is no more than specks against the far ridge. Scouts are dispatched cautiously once the gates are finally unbarred, stepping into sunlight with wary steps. You descend to the courtyard, legs unsteady not from battle, but from the sudden release of constant vigilance. The portcullis groans upward, iron teeth lifting from stone grooves for the first time in what feels like an age. The drawbridge lowers with a heavy, deliberate creak, reconnecting you to a world that seems almost unreal in its openness. The air beyond the gate smells different, fresher somehow, less saturated with smoke and confinement. You step cautiously across the threshold, boots meeting earth not bounded by stone. The moat, once a line of survival, now feels like a quiet pond reflecting sky. You glance back at the castle and see it anew, walls blackened in places, hoardings patched and reinforced, the eastern base scarred, where earth shifted and collapsed. It stands not pristine, but proven. Scouts return by late afternoon confirming what your eyes already suspected. The enemy has withdrawn fully, leaving behind only abandoned debris, broken ladders, scattered arrow shafts, a section of charred timber from the siege tower's bridge. No ambush waits in the hedgerows. The siege, improbably and undeniably, has ended. Inside the walls, relief unfolds in layers. The steward revisits his wax tablets, recalculating not days of endurance, but weeks of recovery. The cook allows herself a slightly thicker ladle of stew that evening. Not lavish, but celebratory in its modest abundance. In the infirmary, the fevered guard's breathing steadies, as though even his body senses the shift from siege to reprieve. Windows are opened wider to let in clean air. Straw bedding is carried out and shaken in sunlight. You wander through the courtyard slowly, noticing small details that had faded into the background of survival. The chapel bell rings again, this time not in warning, but in gratitude. The children who had grown so quiet begin to chase each other with tentative laughter. A cat stalks confidently along the edge of a grain sack, triumphant in its small war against rats. Even the old mare seems lighter on her hooves as she is led toward the reopened pasture beyond the walls. As evening settles on this first day without encirclement, you climb the battlements one more time. The field stretches open and unthreatening, marked only by flattened grass and the faint outlines where tents once stood. The sky above glows with a softer gold, clouds drifting lazily as if nothing monumental has transpired below. You rest your forearms on the crenellation and allow your breathing to slow, to deepen. The castle is quieter now, not from fear, but from fatigue. You feel it in your bones, the accumulated weight of rationed meals, broken sleep, smoke-filled lungs, and constant watchfulness. Yet beneath that exhaustion lies something steadier, endurance proven not in a single heroic clash, but in the slow refusal to yield. The walls held, the people held. Even when hunger thinned and sickness whispered, and earth trembled beneath your feet, you remained. Night approaches gently, no longer an arena for stealth or fire, but a simple folding of day into rest. Torches are lit along the wall, not in frantic preparation, but in quiet habit. The breeze carries the scent of open fields rather than hostile campfires. You close your eyes for a moment and feel the stone beneath your palms, solid and ancient, warmed faintly by the day's sun. The siege has carved its marks into wood and flesh alike, but it has not taken the heart of the castle. And as darkness settles softly over walls that have endured flame and tunnel and tower, you let your shoulders finally relax. The longest night has passed. The dawn that follows does not demand defence. It simply arrives, patient and forgiving, over stone that has remembered how to stand.